So this is being recorded. This is a Temple Beth Torah lunchtime learning program, but featuring the Anti-Defamation League. Lisa Stone is here. Lisa's a lifelong educator. She and I have known each other for quite some time. Mazel tov to her on her son Benjamin's wedding this past week. It's always a thrill to have simchas, especially at times when we see so many difficult things going on in the world. You know, obviously the situation in the Ukraine is troubling all of us. When something happens in the world, something happens to Jewish people, people's lives are threatened. And we have seen an unfortunate rise of anti-Semitism lately. It, in my opinion, really is so unfortunate because there's a lot of good work going on in the area of tolerance and understanding. And so the loud, vocal, public anti-Semitic acts really overshadow the good work that so many people do. And so the Anti-Defamation League has been around. Lisa's going to tell us more, but they've been around for well over 100 years. I think 1907, if my memory is correct. And she'll tell us more about the program, Words to Action, how to respond to anti-Semitism. And for that, I will say, take it away, Lisa.
Thank you, Rabbi Dan. I appreciate it. I'm so grateful y'all are all here and that you were interested in learning about this. It's something that most people, once they go through it, feel very empowered. It's not meant to be a downer, even though the material is obviously difficult. And while I may not have answers to every question, I'll be very happy to take your questions. And if I can't answer it right away, I will definitely get back to you. The ADL wants to be a resource for you now and forever. Well, we wish we didn't have to, but we know we're going to need to. So yes, we wish to be a resource for you. So I will start sharing my screen and let's see how it's going to work. Okay. Come on, wake up. Oh, now it's being fussy. Are y'all seeing the single slide, or are you seeing more than that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm seeing something different because I have two screens as we were discussing, but we're going to make this work. So again, welcome. I always want to point out that, now did my slide advance or no? Are you seeing my name?
No, we still see welcome ADL's Word to Action.
So then we've got the wrong thing happening. Hold on. Now, are you seeing my name?
No.
Okay, so something has, let me, it's the double slide thing. Let me see if I can end it and start again. Now. Okay. Once it works, it's wonderful. Okay. All right, now you're seeing the single screen, I hope, or it's still,
no,
here we go.
Just switch
there
it.
We go.
Now we got it.
Mindy. Yes. Yes, Mindy.
Hello.
Yes, Mindy. Can you hear us? Oh, we may have lost Mindy. Oh, shall I go ahead? You're seeing just the single screen now, right?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So I always want to point out that this program is funded by a family fund, and we're very grateful for that. And now if you'll just look over these questions and see how you would answer them, it gives you something to measure at the end of the program. Just check yourself on these things, please. And obviously there are degrees of comfort, but basically just see how you feel about these. Okay. And it's not a problem if you didn't get through them all, but I will show this again at the end.
And if I can just interrupt for a second, yes. From our communication before, my understanding is that you'd like this to be somewhat interactive.
Absolutely.
You want people
Absolutely.
to unmute themselves with a question or just put it in the chat?
Yes, and please, Rabbi, if I don't see something in the chat, interrupt me and let me know that it's there.
Yeah, it's a small enough number of people that
yes,
unmuting what probably won't be a problem.
Absolutely unmute yourselves. And if I can't answer it again, I will get back to you. Thank you, Dan. Okay, so what do you know about ADL? As Rabbi Dan mentioned, they've started branding us just as ADL because it's so much easier to say. Stands for the Anti-Defamation League. We're branded as ADL. It's been around for 109 years, was founded in 1913 because of anti-Semitism at the time, specifically the Leo Frank case. A Jewish lawyer in Chicago said, if a Jew can be lynched in the United States, we need to do something about it now. But at the time, originally, the mission was always double. It's to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all, in recognition of the fact that fighting one prejudice when others are also happening usually doesn't work very well. So it's always been the double mission. And we wish we were going out of business. We're not. We are known around the world, particularly for exposing extremism of all kinds and for providing anti-bias education for all kinds of bias. And we're sort of proud of the fact that we get attacked by both the left and the right. Makes us feel like we're doing something correctly. So we're going to look at a few pictures, which I imagine will be shocking. This is an estate. It happens to be in Brazil. This was only discovered because drones are now so ubiquitous. And so you see somebody putting a swastika in their swimming pool, which seems just ridiculous, but that's what we have to work with. So this is one picture. This is actually from just about a year ago in San Antonio. Honk if you know the Holocaust is fake. We would never have seen this a few years, 5 years ago, let's say. And there have been many such banners hung in Texas and other states. This is from just a few weeks ago in Alabama. A history teacher told students to perform the Nazi salute facing the American flag, which should seem like a bad movie plot line or something. When the school's only Jewish student reported it, that student was disciplined and threatened that if they reported it to the media, they would have further discipline. He still reported it to media, which is why we know about it. And ADL has been working with that school previously for other similar kind of problems, but this is so dramatic. The only good thing you can say about it is you can see several students are not complying with this teacher's request. But again, this would not have happened a few years ago. The Iron Youth is one of the more violent extremist groups that ADL tracks. And that's a very frightening poster. We're just trying to face what's out there right now. And you notice they couch it in terms of white law. So they are clearly white supremacist. And as we will discuss a little more later, white supremacists do not think Jews are white. Never have, never will. Oops, sorry. This is a flyer that has been showing up in a lot of places because of the Goyim Defense League, which if you haven't heard of them, they're fairly new. They've only been around a year plus. And they operate very inexpensively by recruiting people locally wherever they want to have a campaign and just for getting flyers. They're a little obsessive compulsive. They put their flyers in Ziplocs with baggies with rocks or rice so that they don't blow away. And they just carpet neighborhoods. And they're obviously not accurate. You can see that a number of people on here are not necessarily Jewish, but that doesn't matter to them. They're just about creating fear and loathing among people, fear among Jews and loathing among non-Jews. This just particularly upsets me because you see that one of these people at least is Jewish, wearing a Jewish star, and they're conflating COVID and Nazism. And Jewish educators like to be very clear that nothing should ever be compared to the Holocaust. That doesn't mean other things aren't horrible, but nothing should be compared to the Holocaust. And yet you have here Jews being quite gleeful about doing it. So we have all sorts of problems. I include this because it happened at right near a memorial to Anne Frank. So it's particularly striking that somebody does this. Fortunately, as these things are happening, and local law enforcement are being very helpful, very cooperative about getting rid of it very quickly. But we also know we need to record that it happened so that we can educate about it. It's very helpful that the local mayor in this case gave a very strong message condemning it and saying we stand with our Jewish neighbors. But obviously this can be very terrifying to find in your. Okay, I'm sorry. Every time I see this one, I can't get used to it. This was to me so shocking because it's so ugly and hateful. And when the research was done, they found that this actually has been used for more than 10 years to sell items. Now, Amazon removed it quickly, saying it didn't follow their guidelines and so forth. But again, the fact that this is out there and that people pay for it because they think it's funny, it's a problem. This one is very painful because it's a child who puts himself out there on TikTok as a proud young Jew and gets such ugly, hateful responses. Thankfully, he also got many positive ones. But the fact that people feel comfortable putting this ugliness out there for a child just practicing his faith. Again, we need to know what we're up against. And here's another set of flyers from the Goyim Defense League. They use this to raise money by scaring people. This is a classic anti-Semitic trope. The happy merchant is what it's called. But they just surround it, they're saying everything is the fault of the happy merchant, the Jew. They attack Holocaust history, and they still are saying Israel did 9/11. It's just what sells, it's what gets them money. So this is a very frightening poster. This showed up, in fact, started showing up a few years ago in certain cities, not all over the country. And they are not everywhere. They're a tiny minority. The photograph is of the person they caught putting these posters up. But this obviously, again, is very frightening. And we just need to counter it. Not that it's okay that there are only a few of them. It's not. But they're trying to create fear. And they're trying to recruit at the same time. So now the question becomes, how do you feel when you see these kinds of things, the swastikas, or if you hear Heil Hitler, which unfortunately many of our students in public schools hear, not infrequently. You can put it in the chat box or just take yourself off mute and please tell me, what's the emotion that you feel? One or more emotions, please.
Anger.
Anger, yes. Hi, you're still on sadness, absolutely.
Being uncomfortable.
Absolutely, very uncomfortable.
Confusion.
That's very valid. It is confusing because it seems so irrational and wrong. Anyone else? Anything in the chat to share, Rabbi?
Rage and nausea, fear, disgust.
Thank you. Okay, obviously all the emotions you have mentioned are totally valid, and that's what we're going to address in the rest of this workshop. Thank you for sharing that.
We did once, a number of years ago, receive a voicemail that said Heil Hitler. And it was with a giggle. We reported it. Nothing ever came of it. And we didn't know if it was just somebody trying to make a joke. Sometimes, people use humor thinking things are funny.
Right.
When they're, obviously, they could feel very threatening.
Yes, good point to make. Middle school students in particular experience a lot of supposed jokes that are in fact not funny. but the non-Jewish students who are making those jokes really do think they're funny because they don't understand enough. And again, that's part of the big picture about why we need more education, personal and communal. Thank you.
Another feeling that came up in the chat was numbness.
Yeah, certainly as these incidents continue, it is definitely numbing. And that's not unreasonable, and yet we obviously need to find a way to fight that so that we can respond better. Okay, this is a really important point made. A lot of folks say, and I hear students say this a lot, it's just a swastika, no big deal. And sometimes teachers say that to students who report it. It's just a swastika, just ignore it. It's not just a swastika. We all know what's behind it. And even if it wasn't meant to incite violence and fear, it does. And therefore we have to take it seriously and not excuse it in any way. Okay, this is a case study that we use. And ADL obviously doesn't have to make up case studies because these things really happen. Excuse me. But I want y'all to see what we use with students because it's very instructive. So this is a student. He moves to a new school, becomes friends with another person's neighborhood who tells him about her old boyfriend, who's jealous because she has a new friend. First week of school, Joseph, the old boyfriend, and his 4 friends are starting to just, point at Gabe and laugh at him. That's fairly typical stuff, not that it's okay. But the next week they start using anti-Semitic slurs. And then they start getting physical, tripping him, pushing him. Again, it's not quite dangerous, but it's bringing it up a level. And then they surround him, they're dragging him. This is getting obviously much more threatening. And they say they're going to throw him into the ovens. And then one kid says he's going to bring his father's gun to kill Gabe. At that point, thankfully, another student overheard the threat, reported it to the police, and the whole thing was dealt with. The question that I ask students, and I would ask you all, is at what level, at which point should someone have spoken up? In your opinion, where should the intervention have happened? Again, please take yourself off mute or put it in the chat if you'd rather. What do you think?
You see some people mentioning number 5, some people mentioning between 4 and 5.
Okay.
Children and teenagers, often behave in certain ways, what we would call teasing and abuse, could be up to number 3 and 4. When it gets to anti-Semitic slurs, it's crossing the line.
Right.
But teasing, it's hard for children to deal with just normal teasing.
Yeah, there's not much you can do about 4 because that can just be said to be just whatever. And if a student reports that, they're going to be ignored almost certainly. But as you pointed out, 5 has crossed a line clearly. And yet a lot of students have told me that if they report something like that, they're going to be told it's just words, ignore it, it'll go away, don't give it more attention. We understand where that comes from, but that's not wrong. I mean, that's not right. It will not work that way. And we're going to look at why it won't work that way in the next slide. But certainly it should have been reported at 5, even though there are plenty of school authorities who would still ignore that. And that's why obviously we also want it reported to ADL because we will follow up with schools, either anonymously or not, but it needs to be reported to ADL. So yes. Now this is one of ADL's tools that we use to help everyone understand why it needs to be dealt with at this level. If you'll just look through the levels of the pyramid, this is the stuff that so often gets labeled as no big deal, ignore it. Even a lot of this stuff is labeled as no big deal, ignore it. If you get to this point, though, you're talking about lawsuits and a lot of time and money and trouble. So the question becomes, if you're going to be dealing with anti-Semitism or any kind of hate, at which level would you rather deal with it? And hopefully everybody goes, well, it's a lot more trouble the further up you get and a lot more dangerous. So yeah, let's deal with it down here. The research is very clear. People who start doing these things don't stop. They move up the pyramid. The reason it's a pyramid shape is because the top doesn't happen without the bottom. And the Holocaust, for example, is a perfect case of how this worked. This is exactly how the Nazis did what they did. They started here and they just moved, nobody stopped them, they moved up. So the pyramid of hate is meant to be a good reminder of why we all want to know how to respond at the bottom level so that we don't have to go up to other levels. And we'll look at this again. And I will share these resources with you. If you go to adl.org, you'll find it, but I'll be happy to provide this to you. Okay, anybody want to share their personal definition of anti-Semitism? Either go off mute or put it in the chat. Well, I don't know if you want to type it out, but does anyone want to do that?
Lisa,
Yeah.
Before we go into those individual examples, is part of the presentation going, when you say deal with it, you know, at that bottom level, are you going to give us some clues?
Yes,
about
absolutely,
about how
absolutely.
to do it in effective?
Our strategies, yes, we're almost up to the strategies. Right. Yes, thank you, for sure. All right, here we'll look at the technical. This is a technical definition of anti-Semitism. It's 3 parts. It is prejudice or discrimination against Jews as individuals or group. It is hatred of Jews because of religious beliefs, group membership, and or that false belief that Jews are a race. We are not a race, but we are treated as a race. And it's based on age-old stereotypes and myths that target Jews as a people, targets their religious practices and beliefs, and or targets the Jewish state of Israel. So these are the main components of anti-Semitism. And just in case you're interested, the term was created in 1880 by a German anti-Semite who wanted to make Jew hatred sound more academic. He wanted to make it sound more scientific. So he just made up this term, which linguistically, semantically is problematic, but don't let anyone tell you anti-Semitism doesn't really mean Jew hatred. That is exactly what it means today, is Jew hatred. Okay, so, a few, just for not fun exactly, but just to see how this goes. Again, take yourself off mute if you want to put a guess or not. What percentage of American Jews do you think now believe anti-Semitism is a problem in the US? Anybody want to?
25.
25, okay. Anybody else? Thankfully, we're a little further along. This shows you that 88% of American Jews do, which is solid, but I don't know what the other 12% are thinking. And the orange line is what the general American public thinks. And again, that's a bigger number being aware than maybe not, but it's sort of hard to not know that anti-Semitism is a problem today. What percentage of Americans overall do you think say they have never heard of anti-Semitism? A funny question, but I'll show you the answer. So 53% say they've heard of it, they know what it means. You've got 21% of Americans saying they've never heard the term. It's in the news a lot, so it's a little hard to believe. And then they've got another 25% who say, yeah, I've heard it, but I don't really know what it means. So we've got roughly 50% of the American public claiming to not understand anti-Semitism. That's a big education problem. It's not totally up to us as Jews, but we need to deal with it. So again, just think about it. Have you ever avoided wearing something that would identify you publicly as a Jew, or identifying yourself online as a Jew? A lot of students obviously deal with that one. Or visiting a Jewish place since the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. Okay, I'm sorry. So, where's my answers to this? Hold on, there it is. So 25% of American Jews say they have avoided wearing something that identifies them as a Jew. 25% have avoided identifying themselves online as a Jew. And 10% of American Jews admit they have not gone to a Jewish place because they were fearful. If we go back up to this one, it shows you the percentages of people, of Jews who have been attacked as Jews, both in person, online, and 3% being physically attacked. That sounds small, but that represents a lot of people. And obviously it shouldn't be anybody for any of this, much less physically attacked. These are just numbers to give us background. And this is a tricky question, but it's very important. If a Jew organization says something is anti-Semitic, does that mean that a non-Jew is going to say, okay, it's anti-Semitic? You can see that 65% of people say, I'm not going to change my mind because a Jew tells me something's anti-Semitic. 6% say they're less likely. So if a Jew says something's anti-Semitic, they're going to say, no, it's not. And you've got 25% who say, absolutely, the Jew says it's anti-Semitic. Now, this may or may not seem like a big deal to you, but if you shift it for a moment and say, if a Black person or person of color says things racist, are you going to argue with them and say, no, it's not? That's what it represents. And even the no difference is very problematic. I'm not sure what people are thinking, but education again.
Excuse me a minute.
Yes.
I got a question. You know, we had a member at Temple Beth Torah one time. There was a Jewish family, and they quit coming because they said, you know, if there was ever an anti-Semitic problem in the U.S., they would, you know, the places would know where you went. So I think they actually quit being a member at our temple. This was maybe back in the 90s. Do you remember High? I remember there's actually, we had somebody that left, that they quit because they were afraid that if they came to temple, this was, you know, 20 years ago at least, they quit coming because they said, you know, during the Holocaust, they found Jewish people because they found them in shul. They didn't, so they said, you know, don't go to shul and people won't know you're Jewish. I don't believe that.
But Mort, you're right. That's a valid fear. It is easier to find Jews at a synagogue. That doesn't mean that the solution is to not go to synagogue. Obviously, we need to address all the other reasons. But you're quite right. Thank you for bringing that up. That is how.
We actually did. I think they actually withdrew after a year or two. They quit coming.
Yeah, and it's
some
not.
People react differently. It was interesting that the week after the Colleyville incident, we had one of our best attended services and some people who had never been there before, who came to say, we came to be supportive.
Right.
Right. There's you know, when I see that big red thing that says no difference, you know, sometimes I wonder about the difference between anti-Semitism and complete ignorance. You know, the term anti-Semitism, that some people haven't heard of it. I once was renting an apartment and they asked where I worked. I said I worked at a synagogue, and they had never heard the word synagogue. You know, so sometimes the ignorance, and part of the problem with organizations like the Goyim Defense League is preying on the ignorant and giving false information that that people who don't know anything.
Just to show you how far that can go, thank you for bringing that up. I met with A&M students. I did this workshop with them a month ago, and one of the A&M students present, Jewish students, said she actually had another student reach over and touch her head and say, hey, where are your horns? And this is current at A&M. That should be shocking, and yet that's just ignorance. So there is plenty of ignorance out there. And it's very hard to figure out exactly what's ignorance versus hatred. I think a lot of it is probably hatred. Well, it's going to be a mix in any case, but they both need to be addressed. Yes, thank you. So, yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Marla.
Yes.
Back in the 90s, I was living in New York, and I had a really good friend. And she used the expression "Jew me down." And I tried to explain to her that that was not a kind thing to say, that although it shows up in literature a lot, it is a stereotype. And she kept arguing with me. She wasn't anti-Semitic, but she did not want to take in that information at all. So even though I was trying to prevent her from being ignorant. She clearly wasn't anti-Semitic, but it was an expression to her. And she, no way that I was trying to explain it to her made a single difference.
Well, Marla, I bet it did, but maybe she just couldn't admit it at the time. I would certainly like to hope that after maybe feeling defensive and started thinking about it and hopefully did change her behavior. But yes, that Jew me down, it's tricky. Not so many people use it, but the ones that do typically don't know what it means, really. But thank you. You did the right thing.
They don't think.
All right, let's see if we need to see these. Oh, all right, this is the other side of anti-Semitism, the anti-Zionism. Let's look at it quickly. Is it anti-Semitic to say Israel has no right to exist? Anybody want to stick their neck out on that? I will tell you that most American Jews think it is, and they are technically correct. What you're saying, if you say it has no right to exist, is that Jews are not entitled to a safe place. And we know that that is necessary. Historically, we know it's necessary. So at least 85% do. 74% of other Americans think it is, which is a fairly big number again. Is it anti-Semitic to say the US government supports Israel only because of Jewish money? That should ring a bell real fast. Yes, it is, because it's locking right in on that stereotype about Jews and money. But only 55% of Americans get that. And I think that's ignorance. They just don't understand the historical connections. Is it anti-Semitic to say American Jews are more loyal to Israel than America? Again, that should ring a bell, the dual loyalty attack. Half of Americans get that, and the other half probably just don't see what that is. Again, education and being willing to say something, which we're almost there. Okay, here's one more page on the anti-Semitism. I got an email from a 10th grader recently saying that a lot of people think that if you're Jewish, you're Zionist, and that means you approve of Israel's politics. You can criticize the Israeli government without being anti-Semitic, as long as you're saying, I'm criticizing their policies, not their existence. Can a non-Jew do that? Sure. But if you say it shouldn't exist, you've crossed the line, and that's anti-Semitic. The difference being, this is not saying Israel shouldn't exist. It's not saying Jews aren't entitled to safety. And this is saying that Jews are not entitled to safety. And I think that's a fair way to explain it to be. This is just the graphic showing how many people agree that it's anti-Semitic to say Israel has no right to exist. It's, yes, it could be much worse, but we still have work to do. Oh, I include this just because it's a good perspective to have. This is it's a very famous person saying a fairly well-known quotation. It's Martin Luther King Jr. who said that. He visited Israel, he understood the connection, and I think it behooves us, especially today, to know that and to share that both with Jews and with people of color, because it clarifies something. It's not saying that it's anti-Black to be pro-Israel. And there's a lot of folks who think it is. All right, now I'm sorry, we have a few more statistics just to glance at. This is just showing the increase in anti-Semitism over a decade. And it was very dramatic, obviously, and it has continued. It's gotten even higher. This is showing the incidence in our region, which, while the total numbers thankfully are small, one is too many, and the red is the assault, and thankfully we've only had a few of those, but again, one is too many. And 21 went up, unfortunately. You can see that our region, it's a big, funny region. It's basically the southern half of Texas, from Beaumont to El Paso and south. Okay, this is showing just, again, total numbers, thankfully, are small, but any is too many. All right, and I put this in there just because some people think the right thing to do is to argue. A real anti-Semite, a person who hates Jews, is not going to be moved by logic. It's like trying to argue with a Jesus freak or something. That they're not about logic. They're not about rationality. So we would never suggest that you try to change the mind of an anti-Semite. Someone who's ignorant, that's different. That's exactly who we want you to engage with. But we do not want you to try and argue with an anti-Semite, with somebody who hates Jews. It's not going to work. And the best, we're going to talk about it, but the best thing to do is just call it out and say, I'm not interested in discussing this anymore. All right, we're back just to glance at the pyramid again. We're going to now talk about how to address things at this level. So these are very simple responses that ADL has time tested over more than a decade. And what we want is for you to pick something that feels comfortable to you, so it'll be ready for you to use when you need it. The first one probably seems tricky. We're going to look at the few times you can say to someone. I mean, if it's an ignorant statement, that might work. The main catch-all is, what do you mean? Whatever they say, it almost always is appropriate to say, what do you mean by that? Often they won't know what they mean by that, but let's say they do. You don't have to listen. If they start going on about it, you can say, I'm sorry, I disagree with you, and I don't want to discuss it. And that's fine. You've called it out so that anybody who might be observing sees that you've called it out, and you can move on, because you're not going to change their mind if they're an anti-Semite. But any of these statements do the same thing. They call it out, and you can stop if you want. If you're in the mood to go on, that's fine. But the goal is to call out anti-Semitism and any kind of hate so that it's clear that you disagree with it. There have been cases where students who thought it was better to say nothing and not give something attention, then later they hear from a student saying, you're Jewish and you didn't even mind when they said Heil Hitler. And there you go. You've got this whole thing happening where the Jew didn't mind, so it's okay, let's do it. And we really want to avoid that. Okay, this is, by the way, this is on a card. This is one side of the card, this is the other side. And Rabbi, if you want, I can get you these cards to share with your congregation. Obviously, it's pretty clear stuff, but we've got it on like a wallet card if you want it. Laminated.
That'd be great.
Yeah, you just tell me how many. Okay, so here's the case. These are some cases that have been shared with me in the past year. A person was actually told when the pandemic started in their office that they didn't have to worry because they are chosen. Now that's a case where if you go back to these statements, you could say, I know you mean well, but that hurts, right? And they really did mean well. They were, and in case that isn't real clear, Jews were chosen by God to share the commandments with the rest of the world. It's like being the world's goody-goodies. Not an easy job, not something that protects us from anything, obviously. If we were to keep all the commandments as a people, we supposedly would have greater protection, but that's not happening either. So yes, you could say, I know you mean well, but that hurts. Now, this is a case where you're not there when it happens. You can't confront the person who's done the anti-Semitic act. But we've got research, lots of research from bullying that shows that if someone goes to a person who's been bullied, or in this case, attacked, and if you say, you didn't deserve that, that takes away so much of the pain and isolation that is experienced by being attacked with hate. So even though you can't confront the perpetrator, you can say to the victim, that's not your fault. You did not deserve that. And you're doing a really powerful good deed there. And then, oh, by the way, you want to document it and share it with ADL and local law enforcement, but your goal is also to help the victim get through this experience. Okay, so this is a strange case, but I'm imagining some of us have experienced things like this. You've got somebody who is not saying the word Jew in any way, but Jews are being excluded and they're being put in a category. Now, you know, a lot of people would say, well, you don't want to be in that club anyway. Probably not. And in fact, in this case, the students went and started their own service club, which is great, but you still need to call it out, even if it's just one-on-one, and say, what do you mean by that? And they're going to be, then it's on them. Let's see what they would say, right? How do you justify that? And hopefully you could share it with the kids in the club, not just the parent who's saying this. All right, this is some of the classic stuff that kids get all the time. Swastikas, Jews belong in the oven. Now, a 6th grade kid can be prepared to say, what do you mean by that? And report it. Because also you do feel a little better if you stand up to it, because it really hurts if you just take it in silence. So reporting it and saying, what do you mean by that? Okay, this one, I never can believe that a 2nd grader would feel so empowered to punch a fellow 2nd grader and accuse them of killing Jesus. But it just shows parents really do indoctrinate their kids at a young age. Now, when the principal said, couldn't do anything about it because it wasn't on school property, that is partially correct. The principal cannot punish that child because it wasn't on school property. Anybody have a suggestion, though, for the principal, what they could do? Because there's a real powerful response to this.
An educational moment, to do something with the entire school about
Absolutely.
Learning.
Yes, like maybe ask Rabbi Dan to come in and talk to this school. But the point is, the principal had options and chose to just wash his hands and move on. It's not bad that they went to a Jewish day school. Obviously, that's wonderful, but they shouldn't have had to. And the school had an opportunity to do something good. So here you have a classic case where this is a serious thing. I mean, that's really frightening to find that on your school locker. And the student stood up and reported it, and then is told it's a joke. Now, we know it's not a joke. And if it was out of ignorance, that's pretty strange ignorance, because that's really targeting somebody. So this principal is entirely wrong. Thankfully, the parent did report it to ADL, but they moved. This was at the end of the school year, and they moved, and they don't know what happened. I can promise you that if they reported it to ADL, it was going to get dealt with. But it's tricky sometimes. You can't force a school to do, oh, this is No Place for Hate, which is a program ADL does that addresses all kinds of hate in schools. And you can't force a school to do it unless the superintendent says to. And there are districts where superintendents say every school will do this. But yeah, okay. And then we have the final example of this sort, which thankfully went full circle. And you get the note, the swastika, the kid reports it, the teacher takes it seriously, reports it on, kids are suspended, which is serious, and had to write letters of apology and an essay. So it's a very meaningful response. The only thing that this school didn't do was have a school-wide program, which would have been great, because you know that the whole school hears about these things when they happen, but they also did hear that the students had serious consequences. So overall, this works. This addresses the problem. Could go further, but that's a very constructive response. So here are these statements again. And I hope that you're feeling like there's one that you're gonna adopt for yourself, one or more. And I wanna admit that after my first few months working at ADL, when I had this full training, and I actually did get attacked on the U of H campus, I was so shocked that I shut down and I didn't say anything because I was shocked. The person next to me thankfully responded, but it really does take mental preparation sometimes to respond, because it can be so shocking and numbing and all the other things that you pointed out, the feelings that we get with these things. All right, just a few more to show us what we have to deal with. This is in Miami. This seems so ludicrous, and yet to people who don't know better, it's going to be worrisome, and to Jews, it's going to feel very threatening. Imagine this being on a fence in your neighborhood. And this is, again, you have this gorgeous view, and then you see Zionism is Satanism written on the fence. And this is such a cheap thing to do. It takes just a few moments, dark of night, and then you get out there. The authorities remove it pretty quickly, but obviously lots of folks see it, and we need it to be addressed. This was at Congregation for the Jewish Community North a few years ago. I pointed out because it's not classic anti-Semitism. It was the religious aspect of anti-Semitism, just that Jews are broken, crazy, and so forth because we don't worship Jesus. But this is also very frightening. And this was a person who turned out with mental health issues, but that doesn't help congregants when they show up and see this. So we need to be prepared to deal with it quickly, which they were. I point this out because many of you may know Dr. Peter Hotez, who's done so much good work about COVID in Houston and now internationally. He's been nominated for the Nobel Prize because he and a colleague are going to make an inexpensive COVID vaccine available to countries that can afford more. And he has been attacked so much in social media as a Jew because he's a Jew and because he's trying to fight COVID. And it's, there's so much entitlement now among haters to say anything, just so you see what's going on out there. And he has stood up to it. In fact, ADL gave an award because he stands up to it. He's a proud, self-identified Jew, and he doesn't take it quietly. All right, so this is something that if you're not already aware of it, there's a lot of anti-Zionism on many college campuses, not all by any means, but hundreds of college campuses across our country deal with things like this all the time, which can be so painful for Jewish students. And there's been a variety. Thankfully, there's only been 2 cases of arson in the past few years, but that's way too much. But there's been so many attacks on students individually, on Hillels. And it's only in the last year that universities and colleges are starting to stand up to this. There's been a real change. Thankfully, a few students and organizations sued some institutions, and now there's a different level of response. More and more of them, they're not being proactive yet. They are reacting constructively when something happens. A lot of work still to be, yes.
Yeah, just quickly, you pointed out an incident that happened at Congregation Jewish Community North, which is a neighbor of Temple Beth Torah. Shortly after that incident, we had an incident on a Friday night in which, as we were getting ready to exit the temple, there was bunches of flowers, and each one had a little note on it saying, "We're honored to share the planet with you." And it was just such a contrast between the other things that had been happening that it was just an astounding moment to realize that, boy, there are plenty of haters and plenty of lovers.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the flowers were anonymous, right? Because they didn't, I mean, that's not bad.
They didn't identify with an organization or anything. They just put these little notes on the flowers. There was enough for everyone who had been at services that night, and everyone took home a flower that said, "We're honored to share the planet with you."
That is wonderful. And I'm going to show some positive things at the end, because there have been plenty of positive responses. It's hard to match all the hate, but there are a lot of things happening that try to do it. Now, these are just, we don't need to look at these, but I just know that there are so many strange and painful things happening on college campuses. And, somebody refusing to eat challah because they're pro-Palestinian, all the way to people feeling personally attacked because they are Jews. And if you ask the question, how do you respond to saying Israel shouldn't exist, particularly on a campus, you'll notice some of these things are suited to students, but any of 5, 6, 7, or 8 are entirely appropriate. And again, you don't have to argue or carry on more than saying anything. It's just calling it out, and then you can move on. But certainly 5, 6, 7, and 8 address the problem. 3 is my favorite, but we're not doing that. And in case this is still happening, these are old pictures from early COVID. But there was so much anti-Semitism initially, and it has continued on all the websites where haters go. COVID is entirely blamed on Jews. It's easy to do because we make a convenient scapegoat. But you notice how ugly these images are. And I put this in there because obviously we're not the only ones suffering discrimination and hate now. Asians, the incidence of hate crimes against them has increased 400% in some places in the last couple of years. It's horrific. You may remember this fellow. He's in jail now, I'm happy to say. But the fact that he felt entitled to wear a shirt, making Auschwitz a joke, it shows the level of entitlement that has happened amongst Americans. It's outrageous, and yet it's not at all at this point. This is a very good point made by someone who was a survivor of concentration camps. We have to be aware and we have to fight it. Otherwise, it takes over, it metastasizes, it spreads like a disease. And just in case this is clear, white supremacy is something we all need to stand up to, not just because they think Jews aren't white, but because it actually is the underpinning for most of the hate that's happening against Jews and other people now. It is a system that says white folks are threatened and therefore have to fight what they perceive as the threats to them, which of course are not actual threats to them. But they blame Jews for immigration, for everything they think is taking away white power and safety is blamed. We are the root cause of their problems. And this is, okay, Alex Edelman, I've just learned about him. He's an up-and-coming Jewish comedian. And he says that it is a lose-lose thing. He says, if you don't like white people, then Jews are the whitest possible people in the world. But if you think being white is awesome, then Jews are not white and never can be white. It's a total double bind. And that's what we're working with. The attacks from right and left is what that comes down to. This is just, again, something that is so shocking that people make money off of this stuff. It was removed very quickly once it was reported, but the fact that it goes up online is crazy. And I'm willing to believe it's mostly just people wanting to make money by being what they think is clever, but it's dangerous. Here's another one of these. They blur out the phone number. They don't want anybody doing it. But this was another one of the flyers, pro-white. You see, they're not being anti-anything, even though they stick the swastika there, but they're just pro-white, fighting for the white race. That gets a lot of recruits. Okay, canary in the coal mine. ADL says Jews are the canary in the coal mine of hate, that we're just often first to be attacked. Nevertheless, white supremacists believe Jews are not white. We are the most dangerous enemy they face. And non-Jews obviously should fight anti-Semitism because it gets at the root of these attacks that spread to everyone. So it's not just that we're fighting anti-Semitism for ourselves, we're fighting anti-Semitism because it is the root of so much hate. Just in case this helps some folks, a hate crime carries a stiffer penalty. So it is worth finding out and clarifying if something is a hate crime. In order to be a hate crime, an incident first has to be an actual crime. And then if it can be demonstrated that that crime was committed because of bias or prejudice, then it is a hate crime and it has a stiffer penalty. Now, this is Texas law. It varies by state. So you can't be sure this would be the same in any state, which is a little crazy, but that's what we have to work with. But it is important to clarify when things are hate crimes. Hate crimes, should look nuts. Jews are less than 2% of the population in the United States, and yet 58% of the hate crimes, roughly, it's changed a little bit, but it's very close to this now, are directed against Jews. That's crazy. This is our summary. When anti-Semitism is brought up in any way, there usually seems to be a sort of excuse about why you should let it go. And our goal is to debunk all those common excuses and make it clear we do not agree with anything that's anti-Semitic or hateful to anyone. It's not okay with Jews. That's what we're trying to do. Reporting incidents of hate, any kind of hate, please, if you go to adl.org, you'll find it. But if you go to adl.org/report incident, you'll get right to the form. It takes literally a few minutes to fill out. Although please remember, if anything is an emergency, dial 911 immediately and then come back and report it to us later. We share everything with law enforcement, local and FBI. And the FBI uses all these reports to try to prevent further incidents. So it's really valuable. There is nothing that ADL thinks is too small an incident to report. Okay, reporting is a really key action to take because you never know when it's going to be the clue that helps them figure out something that they can then prevent from happening in the future. The FBI prevents so many things from happening because they get information. So please, adl.org/report incident after you dial 911 if something is dangerous. I include this just so you see the gaming situation is pretty bad. There's a lot of hate online, as I'm sure you're not too surprised. But the numbers are shocking. The only thing good about it is that 83% of people who game still report making friends from it. So, okay, you can say it's justified, but there's a lot of ugliness that happens in online gaming. And ADL, by the way, does have collaborations with several tech companies, and we're trying to address these things. Some of it's getting a little better. It's a tough thing because it's so open. Online is so open. And this gives us another handle on what we need to deal with. This was a survey done of younger folks, and the numbers were not good. 63% didn't know that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. And about half acknowledged that they had seen Holocaust denial and distortion on social media. Again, ADL is working on this in particular, the social media issue, in a number of ways, making some progress, but it's tough. There's some legislation being put out there to address some of this too, but it's a long haul to fix these problems. But individually, we can all do a small part to make it better. Okay, here's some good stuff. Thank you. We're getting there. So I don't read Yiddish. This is Yiddish. Comes from the FBI. And what it says is an encouragement to what are going to be basically very Orthodox Jews to report incidents because they know that it's happening and it's not being reported. So it's really wonderful that the government is addressing those kind of weaknesses in the systems. This went up in New York in particular. And speak up, share facts, show strength. That's one of ADL's mottos. If you go to adl.org, you will find so many resources. I don't think I've seen half of what's at adl.org. Really good information. If you email me, I will always be very happy to help you with anything or find the person who can help you. But we have discussion materials for families in any setting. We have so much information about a variety of things, not just anti-Semitism, but certainly that. And then reporting incidents to us and law enforcement makes such a difference. It's really valuable. Here's another really lovely thing that went up in New York. And you know, the first two up here, they look Jewish, but these two folks don't look particularly Jewish, but they're saying Jewish New Yorkers belong here and anti-Semitism doesn't. This was used in New York subway systems extensively. And that's a very positive thing to see. Here's the pyramid of hate again. We hope everybody feels a little more comfortable dealing with things at the lowest level. And here are, oh, I didn't want this. This is not the, here it is. This is the one to look at. And again, Rabbi, you tell me how many cards you want and I'll get them to you. Here's that list that we started with. See if you feel a little stronger on some of these things. I hope. If you don't, you just go to adl.org and you'll get everything you need there. It does get easier over time, I will tell you. It gets easier to stand up to these things and to deal with them. Here's a great one. It's a little bit, Jubelong is an interesting organization. They're very in your face. This one's a little bit negative to my mind, but there's a very positive one coming up. I promise to love being Jewish 10 times more than anyone hates me for it. It's, you know, it's complicated, but it's great. This was on a public building in Pittsburgh, I think. And that's really, that's great. That's very public. And this is a clearly Muslim woman who's sticking her neck out even further than it is already because she's Muslim to say she stands up with Jews. That's really wonderful. And obviously Jews do that with Muslims too. But this isn't, you know, the article says it's not just a Jewish problem. I hope that you feel comfortable doing something differently and that you're clear about what you will do to constructively confront anti-Semitism, not get into discussions unless you want to, but to address it, and advocating for greater respect. And I'm sorry, I should say, how can Beth Torah and ADL help you more? Federation obviously will help too. And I think we have, well, yes, definitely thank you all. Thanks to Rabbi Gordon and Dr. Penn for inviting me here, and to you all for addressing these things. And obviously, I really hope we all stay safe and well. I think I had, here's a really another powerful positive statement. This was put up in Indianapolis after an incident, but that's a big deal. You know, that cost money and trouble, and they did it. That's very positive. And I may have, we do have a program. If you want even more information, let me know if you can't get this whole registration down. But we have a program that will give you more resources. Yeah, from the May As Well Have Fun department, if you didn't already hear about the Jewish face lasers, somebody made patches, and it's a really great patch, and it's so tempting to get them and hand them out all over the place. But we may as well have a little fun from it. All right, let's see. I want to put this back up here. So any questions? Well, here, I can just quit sharing now and see if any questions, comments, requests. You all have been great to get through all this. It's a lot. Anything in the chat that we haven't seen? Okay, right.
The Anti-Defamation League is, oh, go ahead, Debbie.
I would just say thank you for sharing all this information with us. I think it's been very helpful.
I hope so. Thank you very much. It's sort of a never-ending thing, right? There's always more, but just what you all just did in an hour covers a lot. And again, adl.org, or email me and get you anything that you want. There are a lot of people working on this, thankfully. And we're making progress in some ways. It's just there's always more coming at us. It's never done.
Yes, in its 100+ years of existence, the Anti-Defamation League's probably their major goal is to not be needed.
Yeah.
And such a key that Lisa presented was the importance of learning and education for everybody, Jew and non-Jew alike. We're preaching the choir here because those of you who are here came to learn. And the more we can, the more we can be ourselves, be proud of who we are, interact with others in a way that they understand that that Jewish people are not the enemy, then we may make them non-enemies. Rabbi Charlie Clinton Walker had said in the healing service after the incident in Colleyville, quoting Dr. Martin Luther King, saying, that love is the only thing that can turn an enemy into a friend. And if we live by that, we may have more friends with whom we disagree.
I keep Rabbi Charlie's prayer on a card here. He said, we stand together against hatred, bigotry, and violence. We stand together in love and support of each other. This was Jews and non-Jews at the service. We stand together in words and deeds. We stand together understanding that our actions matter. Very well put.
Beautiful. I think that's unless there are other questions, I think that's a wonderful closing comment from somebody who was clearly a victim of an anti-Semitic act and has turned it into a teachable moment for the world.
Just thank you all again very much. Don't hesitate to contact me. And I hope you don't encounter any anti-Semitism that needs to be addressed. But if you do, I hope you feel comfortable doing it in a way that is safe for you.
I'm going to stop the recording now, but leave the room open for a few minutes if there are more questions.
Sure.